from across the country, around the world. This is the Life Midwest podcast. Joining communications major and Army vet as we talk about life events, both current and events. Welcome to episode 74. Hosting today is myself, Lenny Wells. Our washed up musician slash producer is off this week, serenading his sweetheart and doing God knows what. Remember, Jesus is watching you. Today, we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. A good IRA. Never thought I'd say that before, but, well, you know, that's what...
Is a Roth IRA a good IRA?
Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna stop going with that. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of this episode.
Wow, you're pulling out all the Kevin tropes. I love it.
Am I?
This is the Life Midwest podcast.
I really wanted to do that because I love Kevin. Shout out to you because I love every time like you do that. You're like this, like a true radio host, and I can only aspire to be as good as you are. So. But yeah, Wes, talk to us a little bit about what this is.
So the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, for those of us who live under rocks, no judgment, I also live under a rock, but I did happen to come across this. It's actually a pretty significant law that went into effect, or like a series of laws, an act that went into effect. You may be familiar with what the Democrats in office were trying to propose as the Build Back Better plan, or the Build Back Better Act, or maybe like the New Green Deal even. This is what that turned into, much like the Affordable Care Act, which was originally like Obamacare or whatever. It got whittled down and whittled down and whittled down, and the byproduct was not a finished product, not something that would have been as excellent as it could have been, but something that no less is going to help many of Americans, individual Americans, families, companies alike. Generally, overall, in my opinion at least, and I think a lot of people's opinion surrounding this topic, is it's a good thing overall. To get into it, we actually have both the White House and the summary from Congress gave us basically printouts that tell us everything that's in this act. The Inflation Act of 2022 will make a historic down payment on deficit reduction to fight inflation, invest in domestic energy production and manufacturing, and reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030. The bill will also finally allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices and extend the expanded Affordable Care Act program for 3 more years. That's through 2025. Additionally, the agreement calls for comprehensive permitting reform legislation to be passed before the end of the fiscal year. Permitting reform is essential to unlocking domestic energy and transmission projects, which will lower the cost for consumers and help us meet our long-term emission goals. This looks like something like the Paris Climate Accord, right? Like the U.S. is finally getting on track with reducing emissions. We actually have a printout here of how they're going to do that. We're showing estimates. We're not just printing money. This isn't inflation, turn the money printer on, money go brrr. This is them getting money from other places, reallocating money. 15% corporate minimum tax will get us $222 billion of that $737 billion estimate. Prescription drug pricing reform will get us another $265 billion. IRS tax enforcement, we're looking to reclaim about $124 billion through that, and then 1% stock buyback fee of $74 billion and loss limitation extension of $52 billion.
Yeah, so that's just where the money comes from, right? And then it also goes into investments, which will ultimately, you know, drive down inflation and create these opportunities that their goals are talking about. So for a total investment of $437 billion, $369 billion of that is going to energy security and climate change. $64 billion goes into the ACA extension, and then Western drought resiliency is getting its own $4 billion. And we could cover like the drought issue in the American West as like its own episode, so we won't quite get like too deep into that, but that just shows like where a lot of this is like going to end up going to as well.
Right. And also, so it was $737 billion they're planning to reclaim or collect. and then they're only spending 437 billion. So that leaves about a 300 billion deficit reduction, which is kind of insignificant when you consider our deficits in the trillions. But it's not. I'm not sure in the short term it's affecting inflation too much, but at least they're not inflating more by printing money.
We could spend like a whole like arc of episodes going into like how national debt works, because there's the common misconception that a lot of politicians want you to believe that national debt is bad, and it's not really bad or good. So we won't get into that. But it is a roughly net positive in terms of our economic situation. And you're 100% right. It's going to be more of like a long term solution, but you know, much like touching back on what you said, it resembles the ACA in that it could have been something great. We're getting something that's lesser but still needed. So, like you, I'm excited and happy that at least something's being done. So, let's get into it a little bit deeper. Get some more specifics out.
Yeah, so what this is going to do is it's going to expand Medicare benefits. We're talking free vaccines as early as 2023, which we've been having free vaccines, right? At least for COVID. So they're expanding that so everyone can be vaccinated. A $35 a month insulin cap from 2023 forward for out of drug cost, and an estimated $4,000 or less in 2024, and settling at $2,000 in 2025. So if you pay out of pocket for medicines in the 10,000, no more than 4,000 in 2024, and then in 2025 a cap of 2,000, which is significant. Like I've been on like ADHD medicines, and those aren't cheap. I've probably paid more than that 2024 cap in my at least 1 year of my life. So that's exciting for probably a lot of people, especially of older demographics and those who are sick.
Yeah, I my mother-in-law takes some very expensive medications. I actually, it's really funny that we're talking about this because like today, I called the Walgreens pharmacy where I get my ADHD meds filled at, and since like I'm between insurance carriers right now, I asked them. I was like, "Hey, so how much is my medication going to be without insurance?" And they're like, "It's going to be almost $400." And I like just about shit myself. So, um, you know, $400 over 12 months, that's a lot of money. So,
Right.
yeah, I'm personally excited for this. That also is going to help people that just have, like need stuff for like allergies, like EpiPens, for like example, right? Those are like through the roof, just ridiculously expensive.
Criminally so.
Yeah, criminally so. The insulin, that's huge. That's so huge. I don't have to like I don't want to like beat the dead horse, but I know everybody's like heard those stories of like people dying because they've been rationing insulin. That really hit my grandparents pretty hard, because my grandfather was a diabetic. He was insulin dependent diabetic, and that's potentially in my future. It's too late for him, unfortunately. But again, at least it's a step in the right direction.
What else this IRA or Inflation Reduction Act will do is lower our energy bills. They predict they'll cut energy by $500 to $1,000 per year for the individual or family, I would suppose. It doesn't directly say, it just says number 2, lowering energy bills, cut energy by 500 to 1,000. We can speculate that because of this act in the long run, families are going to pay less on energy. I would imagine if we're giving incentives, and we'll get to that, they're giving incentives for you to invest in like newer energy efficient products, so like induction ovens as opposed to a 1980s electric burner. You're gonna get a rebate for buying that, so potentially you get it for free, and then you're going to save money by actually using less electricity. Unless they're talking about like whole infrastructure redo where like it's just more efficient to get energy to you, therefore you save money. I'm assuming that's where these energy bills savings come from. So let me tell you what else this Inflation Reduction Act does. It's going to lower healthcare costs. I know we mentioned that previously, but they say here saves the average enrollee $800 a year in the ACA marketplace. That's the Affordable Care Act. Allows Medicare to negotiate 100 drugs over the next decade and requires drug companies to rebate back price increases higher than inflation. So all of those pharmaceutical companies exploiting inflation as a reason why their drugs are astronomically high, they're going to have to offer rebates, it looks like. And also, I don't know about you, but when I was on private health insurance, I'm not even in the country now, so I'm not on American health insurance, but I was paying a little more than $200 a month. Saving $800 a year is like not paying my health insurance for like 3.5, 4 months, which is not insignificant.
This is going to be insane, at least to you, and probably to some of our listeners as well. But so with the healthcare that I get through from my previous employer and my now current employer that I currently have, roughly like every 2 weeks, so like every pay period, I'm like $600 comes out of my paycheck.
Jesus fucking Christ.
And that's for myself, Brittany, and the kids.
So you're probably just in that, I don't want to call it a sweet spot because it sucks balls, but like you're probably just in that spot where you make too much to be on the current ACA, but not enough for that to be like insignificant to your daily life.
Yeah. So without like getting too much into like personal business, you're probably right. I haven't looked at like what, or even if I would qualify for the ACA program here in the state of Washington. But it's rough, man. I'll just say that it's fucking rough. But like there is a little grain of salt with that because like the plans that were offered through like my current employer, I chose to go with the better of the two healthcare plan options because while it's more expensive like per pay period, they're also like a lot of things like I don't have like I do have a premium to meet, but like the premium is lower.
Premium is what you pay monthly. Deductible is what you have to meet for 100%.
Thank you. Yeah. I have the deductible's the same, but once I meet that deductible, like everything's fully covered, right? So whereas with like the other plan, just for the sake of having numbers, let's say like the deductible's like 4,000 for the family, and then after I meet that deductible on the current plan, everything else is just paid for by the insurance. Whereas with the other plan, after I met that $4,000 deductible, only 80% would be covered by insurance, which, is fucking rough. And like it's got better like having like a bunch of co-pays instead of having like co-insurance. The way they handle prescription drug prices, which thank God that this is being addressed with this, because anyways, it'll affect how that works. But yeah, healthcare, I'm genuinely like shocked and surprised that this level of detail and this much went into healthcare for the IRA. It's genuinely shocking to me.
As an aside, I think it's a good start, right? Like I think a single payer healthcare system is not only doable but the right way to go, but this is definitely better than what we've been given thus far. So like it
Yeah, no, 100%. I just mean that like I'm shocked that it even got through like this way, because going back to like the baseline ACA, that could have been so good, but then it just was just gutted, right?
Right. Well, right now we have a majority. Well, we being I'm not technically a Democrat, but like the people who want to be progressive and like make the life better for citizens, we have a majority in the House and the Senate and the president sitting like, so realistically, we should be able to get anything through, but we have people like Manchin who like have concessions like, oh, you got to do drilling in the coast of the Gulf of Mexico in order for us to actually, or me to sign this. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it should have actually been easier to get this through and
Dude,
more.
fuck, fuck Joe Manchin. I'll say that. You know, there was a lot of discussion earlier in the year about what conservatives were calling rhinos, Republican in name only. Well, Joe Manchin's a dino. Not only is he a fucking old ass dinosaur, but he's a Democrat in name only.
He's what a traditional Republican would be if they weren't a fascist, right? Like the GOP has turned fascist. He is a Republican.
Yeah, he's like a 1960s Republican. So, anyways,
goofy as fuck. He ran as a Democrat so he could, like, I don't know, the Republicans suck. Vote for me. Votes in the interest of Republicans.
Yeah. Anyways, moving on. Well, something else that the Inflation Reduction Act does is that it's investing in creating in American manufacturing, which, as anybody from the Midwest, aka the Rust Belt, knows, that's something that's been a real sticking point for a long time. Like ever since, well, probably since before NAFTA, but certainly after, right?
Definitely. We actually see this in action already. If you're from Ohio, like, you're not technically from Ohio, but you grew up there.
No,
right?
I was born in Toledo.
Oh shit! I remember your My Friend episode where like you weren't there for some young part of your life, and maybe I confused that. But yeah, like the three of us hosts are from the Toledo area, and just a few hours south, a couple hours south in Columbus, they're building an Intel plant where they make chips. That's American manufacturer. That plant's not going to Taiwan. It's not going to, I don't even know where else they put fabs.
South Korea.
But like we're getting them in South Korea, right? Like we're getting them in Arizona. We're getting them in Ohio. We're getting them in a lot of places. And like that might not directly be this, but we're seeing the effect of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. That's definitely got to combat inflation in the long run.
Yeah, 100%. And like, so, and that goes back into it directly combats inflation by putting, more money into the American economy. Those plant jobs, obviously you're not going to have, Becky Joe, sitting at an assembly line soldering, Intel chips together, but the maintenance and the upkeep for just like the robots and building the plants themselves, and then everything that goes into maintaining the buildings, that's just that, that's it goes back to, it's like a direct parallel to when steel mills were, all up and down the Great Lakes region. It's almost like bringing back the automotive manufacturing after World War II. And not only does it do those things, but it also creates economic security, because you mentioned Taiwan as like a place where computer chips are built, and anyone that's been paying attention to the news lately knows that there's a little bit of tension between the U.S. and China in regards to Taiwan. So, not to speculate too much about the end of the world or whatever, but if China were to decide that it wants to exude its big hard rock dick onto Taiwan and just take over the place, not only would that cause like a worldwide shortage of computer chips like in the immediacy, right, because of just destruction of infrastructure and buildings and X, Y, and Z, but then even when those facilities are rebuilt and up and running again, now China would have a stranglehold on the world's economy, because for whatever goddamn reason someone decided to put computer manufacturing on a tiny ass little island right next to fucking communist China. So now they have like a third of the chip manufacturing that everybody in the world needs because technology. So
I look at this act is we're finally trying to participate in what the world is now. We absolutely dominated during the Industrial Revolution, right? Turn of the century, we have all the means of production, big land to exploit, a lot of new people that we can exploit, and we made a shit ton of money as a country. And then we became successful. The world, like, police, the world reserve, we're basically like the globalization masters up until recently. And now there's finally this green revolution. Europe's been there for a decade or more. China's already getting there. Basically, every country that isn't the U.S., and I know I'm generalizing and exaggerating here, like hasn't capitalized or has already capitalized on the green revolution. Everyone's trying to enforce the Paris climate agreement. Everyone's trying to bring like ways that their country can participate in this new future, and the US is finally sticking their foot in, like, all right, fine, we'll cooperate, let's do this, with only half of the elected body wanting to do that.
Yeah, well, I'll give you for sure that the U.S. is sorely lagging behind in regards to like the Paris Climate Accords. Even though we're not even like part of that anymore, right? Like I know
I think
Trump
we
took us
rejoined
out.
it.
Oh, did we? Okay. So much has fucking happened over the past however long Biden's actually been in office that like I didn't even know if he had rejoined the climate accords. But that point notwithstanding, as one of the largest consumer economies in the, or if not the largest consumer economy in the world, you're right. Like America has to put its money where its mouth is and be the first ones to do it and do it like amazingly well. Because if we're not going to do it, China sure as hell isn't going to do it. Developing nations, not to say that India is a developing nation, but like the a majority of its population has to be living below whatever the poverty line is for that country. They're sure as hell not going to do it. Their economy and population are still expanding, and
I would call them a developing nation. I don't think that's like inflammatory at all. If they have a curve going directly up on their GDP every year, they're probably a developing nation. China did it. Now India's doing it.
Sure. So, anyways, but I think my point still stands that like if we don't do it, we can't expect really anybody else to, because like I said, we have the one of, if not the largest consumer economies in the world. So, in order for any real change to happen, we have to do it first. Going back to like how you were talking about, Europe's been doing it. Yeah, they have, but it's like amounted to, Febreze after you've just blown up the bathroom and it won't flush. It's not really fixing the situation. It's more of like a temporary, like, it's okay for now, instead of like anything meaningful.
Europe's built better to do it based on their geography. I feel like Europe's pretty damn small. You could fit like all of Europe in the east coast of the US. So they have like public transportation, like having trains and trolleys as opposed to like buses and cars and taxis and Ubers and individual people owning their own car just automatically cuts down on CO2 emissions and methane emissions. In the US, like we've been cursed from a pretty early on in the previous century, like the early 1900 when cars came into existence. Like the government did a push to make sure that public transportation wasn't great. We had car lobbies making the government or encouraging the government to build roads that go everywhere, which is really good for us as far as transportation from one side of a very long country to another and then up and down. But we don't have like train systems that are modern or competitive. We don't have like trolley or transit systems in cities that are good. We do in some places, of course. Like there's a subway in New York and there's like a tram in like the greater DC metropolis, and but most places don't have that. Europe's nice and small and compact, and they don't produce as much CO2 because they have good train system, good like city public trams and whatnot.
I'm just gonna default to you there because I don't know enough about European city planning, but I will agree with you that Americans' metropolitan areas are horrendously planned, and especially when it comes to mass transit. Just like speaking from experience, the city of Seattle has, as opposed to doing like what other large cities did, like New York or Los Angeles, where they built up. Before building out, Seattle decided to spread out, and it is like a very small, like downtown area that has like the skyscrapers or whatever, which does not. You would think it would facilitate a better mass transit system, but it's not that great at all. It's not great at all.
If anyone wants an example of how poorly our cities are set up, look at a picture of like the big, maybe it's a baseball field, maybe it's a basketball stadium like Staples Center or something in Los Angeles. Big city with like overpopulation and like not a lot going on for space, has this massive parking lot surrounding the stadium. But then you go to Europe where like soccer is the main sport, and Europe has really good public transportation, and you have a stadium 10 times the size with no visible parking spaces. Like, so all this land is used for driving, and we have to drive because that's how a system's set up. So unless we have electric vehicles with clean energy going into those electric vehicles, we wouldn't meet any climate accord agreement.
Well, we probably still would. We probably still would. But before we finish up our last topic with this, we just want to remind everybody that you can reach out to us if you have questions, comments, concerns, or whatever the hell. If you just want to talk to me over on the socials, you can email us at support@thelifemidwest. We are at the Life Midwest on Twitter, Instagram, technically TikTok, but maybe we're going to do something else with that in the future. We'll see about Reddit eventually, but we need your interactions. But still, if you decide you want to support us, because it does cost money to run the show, paypal.me/lifemidwest. And I'm missing something. Sorry, Kevin, I missed it. Anyways, Wes, let's talk about the sexiest part of this piece of legislation, and that's taxes and the IRS.
Oh God, I almost came. So sexy. Just taxes in general really get me riled up. So what they're doing here is they're fixing taxes a little bit. They're buffering the IRS with more money to hire new agents, which is good. There's a lot of misinformation going on about like, oh, they're hiring 80,000 IRS agents and they're going to come to the average American's home with a gun and take your money, which is like 100% complete bullshit. We're actually going to provide a couple links in the description of why that's bullshit, but that's been a major talking point for the GOP. They're not hiring 80,000 people plus, like 50,000 people are up for retirement. They're hiring 30,000 people, which you might still say that's a shit ton of people. To be fair, compared to what it would have been in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, the IRS has been gutted and gutted and gutted, Republican term after Republican term. It's all part of the corruption. You don't want rich people to be investigated, so you keep gutting the IRS. You have lobbies like TurboTax, paying politicians to make it so the tax code is needlessly difficult to understand, and you have to pay an organization like TurboTax or H&R Block to do your taxes for you. Aside from the IRA, the U.S. government, like the Treasury and the IRS, are actually considering making it so you can just file your taxes through an official government website, not one that's built by Intuit TurboTax. We're also going to provide a link. We had maybe Kevin can put it in the description in post-production, but we did an episode about why taxes absolutely suck dongs maybe about a year ago. If you want to go back and check that out, it has tax in the name. I'm terrible at my job. Get over it. But this is exciting because they're putting money into the IRS finally. They're putting they're getting $124 billion from the IRS. But they're putting money into that. They're putting money in by hiring new people. They're upgrading the infrastructure. They're giving them new computers. The IRS has been running on computers from the 80s and 90s. It's absolutely a joke there. And it's a reason rich people can do whatever they want in this country, is because the IRS has no power against them. So we're bolstering the IRS. You're not going to get audited. Like, if you weren't going to get audited anyways because you're an above the water type of person, you don't do shady stuff, you're not lying on your taxes, or if you make below a certain amount that they probably really just don't care, as long as like 1 year you don't report 100,000 less than you reported the year before with no proof, they're probably not going to audit you, right? So put your pants down, don't get them in a bunch. I think it's completely okay. Obviously, my speculation, but a lot of other well-informed people's speculation as well that I've listened to. It's good for us that the IRS is getting money because now we're not slaves to TurboTax. We don't have to do what they say. We don't have to dread it every year. They're going to start getting money and farming money from the people who really need to pay their taxes. And we're not going to get touched. I mean, unless you're a listener and you make a crap ton of money and you do things illegally, which I doubt that, right?
All right. So I'm just going to read this. This is directly from the whitehouse.gov fact sheet that we've been referencing throughout this whole thing. Under the section, make the tax code fairer. The Inflation Reduction Act will make our tax code fairer by cracking down on millionaires, billionaires, and corporations that evade their obligations and making sure the largest corporations pay their fair share. No family making less than $400,000 per year will see their taxes go up by a single cent, which I imagine that it's most everybody that listens to our podcast falls under that umbrella. So the IRA will raise revenue by one, going after tax dodgers, ensuring the wealthy and large corporations pay the taxes they already owe. That's a little ambiguous, and I'm sure we'll see a little bit more specificity about how they're going to be doing that in the future. Two, cracking down on the largest profitable corporations that currently get away with paying little to no federal income tax, instituting a minimum corporate tax of 15%. So I'm just assuming that regardless of like what income the companies report, that they're just going to get hit with a flat 15% tax, like at minimum, like as it says. I'm not sure how they plan on imposing that. Wes, do you have any insight on that?
I'm not informed enough in that type of thing to really make a statement. I came across several opinions. Basically, they'll just, all right, you file your corporate taxes, and no, you can't claim a loss this year because you bought all these things unless they qualify for it. So they're going to make it more difficult, I think, based on what I've read. Like a lot of companies, big companies will claim they made $1, claim they made a loss because they invested in this, this, and this. But I think they're going to make rules on what you can actually invest in and how you're able to do that. That way, these people can't dodge their taxes. Or maybe they'll just audit them. Hey, this looks suspicious. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, this person took out all this money. That's why you took a loss. Okay, you're still paying this 15%.
Gotcha. So to kind of piggyback on that last point, three, imposing a 1% surcharge on corporate stock buybacks to encourage businesses to invest instead of enriching CEOs or funneling profits tax-free to shareholders. So I think it's not like the same thing as that last point we just talked about, but it is like another piggyback on there. So stock buybacks, that's part of like what gets CEOs these like ridiculous bonuses, right?
While I don't know much about big business, I do know this is good for the average American, like hands down. If we're putting more money in the pockets of Americans, this is helping these big corporations too. They have more spending dollars. They have more availability to buy your products, services, goods, whatever. And then if you're paying your fair share of taxes, the government's going to be able to implement projects without a big hassle. Like, oh, we can't afford that. No, the government finally operates at a surplus because we've been getting our fair share, and so on and so forth. And that makes the lives better for everyone. As the lives become better for the working average person, they have more spending power. They have more ways to give you money so you can make more money at the top, even when you're paying your fair share.
Part of what it's doing too is that, again, most people aren't going to be affected by these tax reforms too. It's only going to be like the ultra wealthy and like the ultra large, corporations. Like think Amazon, for example, right? There was that pretty famous example of like how, like, was it like 2-3 years ago that like Jeff Bezos and Amazon paid $0 in taxes,
right, while making record profits.
Yeah. So that's what this is aimed at. It's aimed at making sure that people with means, with or companies with that make all this fucking money aren't playing by like a different set of rules than like, you know, the mom and pop coffee shop down the road from you, right? Or, you know, just for example, like Moe's in Rossford, in downtown Rossford, it's making sure that Amazon and Moe's are treated the same, and that they're playing at the same rule set. So, which in my opinion is great, because I don't see any reason why Amazon, Boeing, specifically for Washington and I think the Carolinas, um, or Tesla should be treated any differently than any other business.
Yeah, you got to pay your fair share. Why exploit the country and the people of the country if I mean, that's the question right there.
Yeah. Why?
Just don't let it happen.
Exactly. All right. So, great discussion today. I certainly enjoyed it. Kevin, we missed you. We're going to go to the shout outs. Wes, who do you want to shout out today?
I want to shout out to everyone involved in getting this through. It's not what we wanted, what most people wanted, what people who want to see progress and want to see our country and citizens do well wanted, but it is something, and it is a step forward. We obviously would have preferred more. There was supposed to be like a coalition full of young workers, like the actual Green New Deal. Like, hey, we're going to make all these green energy sector jobs. And that sucks massive floppy dongers that we don't get that. That would be a massive boon for experience for the young adults, as well as money for the young adults. And that would have been great. But this is something, it is a step forward. I hope it's not the last piece of legislation that gets through before the November elections. And I really hope that we don't lose a lot of seats to people who don't want to see the country prosper and do well. A lot of people who just want to watch it fail so they can make a profit. So shout out to everyone involved in getting this through, except for Joe Manchin. He can suck big penises, because why the fuck we gotta drill in the Gulf? Like, why? Who's paying you for that shit? Like, fuck off. Shout out to Kevin. Couldn't make it today. This is only his second episode missed, which puts him way better attendance than me still. And we talked about in the last episode, or the episode before that, he's in the process of getting a home. This is going to help him. If you get all the new energy efficient appliances, you're going to end up getting those really cheap and rebated for them. So shout out to you for being in a good position with that right now. Oh, and shout out to mothers. Call your goddamn mothers. Get me called. They love you. Maybe. But if they don't call them. That's just weird and awkward.
I will mimic two of your shout outs. I'm going to shout out people that helped get, this piece of legislation passed. Shouting into our own little echo chamber here. I agree with you still. It's not as much as we wanted, but yes, it is a step in the right direction, and I hope we keep taking steps in this direction. Again, shout out to Kevin. We miss you, bub. Way to be a baller and setting yourself up to be in a position to take full advantage of all this shit. I'm hella jealous. And
Hellas.
Yeah, I'm hellas. Yeah, we missed you. We'll see you next week. You'll be with us, hopefully. And shout out to my wonderful wife, Brittany. She's asleep right now. And thankfully, my kids are as well. Yeah, call your moms. Yeah, Auntie, shout out to Joe Manchin. I hope he gets fist fucked by a gorilla.
Today, so they don't know when we're recording, but today is actually World Gorilla Day, whatever the fuck that means. So extra shout out to gorillas, and especially a shout out to the gorilla that asked fist fucks Joe Manchin.
Hell yeah, brother. All right, guys, we will see you next Saturday and every Saturday here on the Life Midwest podcast. Have a good one.
It doesn't work. I put the kazoo in a balloon.
All right, see you later.
Who's this?